Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to your special horoscope looking at Chiron moving into the sign of Aries for part of 2018, but really in 2019 and right to 2027, a nice long stay. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. So Chiron has just recently, really hours ago, moved into a new sign, just a couple of days from the time I'm recording this overview. And wherever Chiron goes, it evolves and changes our understanding of how true healing can happen there and helps us bring forward healers in those particular areas as well. So let's reflect back on where Chiron has been really for much of this decade. Since the start of this decade, Chiron has been moving through the sign of Pisces. And I remember at the time I wrote about an article that I have on my website, nadiyashah.com. I wrote about how this was going to bring about a change in which we understand addiction on the one hand, understand what it means to truly care for people, especially in terms of hospitalization. It's going to help us to more deeply understand what it means to be imprisoned or isolated. And it would also bring with it a change in our understanding of true compassion as well. And so we've seen since the start of the decade a few important things taking place for us as a collective. Addiction on the one hand, we have seen a whole new conversation rise up in terms of the best way to address addictions. Now, up until recently, really, it was widely believed, that the only real way to address addiction was through a 12-step program. And 12-step programs have helped a lot of people heal profoundly. And I have met people who've gone through 12-step programs as part of healing their addictions, and they feel incredibly grateful for that process. But what we did see from the start of the decade and beyond was looking at more ways, going beyond just a one-size-fits-all kind of way to address addiction, but to have this wider conversation of what it is that we can do to understand addiction more deeply and to heal it more deeply as well. And we've seen the rise of different treatments. Medications have come forward. Everything from traditional medicine like ayahuasca to other more modern medicines to treat addictions, as well as various approaches that have to do with things like harm reduction. And so ultimately what this is about expanding our understanding of healing this particular condition and finding ways to actually address more people, to allow it to be more inclusive, to allow healing of addictions to be more inclusive. We've seen changes in the way in which people are hospitalized. We've seen some places in which programs have been expanded in terms of healthcare. Famously well known, right, is the Affordable Health Care Act in the US that we saw as well. We've also seen a deeper conversation taking place as well where it comes to prisons and imprisonment and what is fair and what is right and how to truly use that environment to bring healing. And so we've seen everything from meditation being offered within prisons and yoga being offered in prisons in a way that it just wasn't before. These alternative therapies entering and traditional therapies entering these particular environments, as well as looking at how just and fair and the purpose of these actual prisons are. So we've seen a widening of that conversation as well. Now, of course, we've also seen compassion, right? I will tell you, I was recently in Europe as part of a European tour that I was doing. And I was very impressed with every place I went to, of course, made an impression on me. But I was very impressed when I went to Ireland, I must say. And I just found the people in Ireland very loving people. And I really contemplated, and I kind of had to ask myself why. Like, why is it that you don't always feel this kind of very loving energy from a people? Like just everyone I interacted with, there was just a lot of love in the exchange. And I thought about, I kind of meditated on it a little bit, and I, had a few conversations really with random strangers. And I sort of realized that a big part of the mythos, if you will, of this country is that the people of Ireland have had to, at various times in their history, really going back hundreds of years, hundreds and hundreds of years, they've had to be refugees. So they've had to, as a result of necessity, actually leave their land and go and find new lands, if you will. And they've really gone all over the world, and it is rooted in necessity that came in different waves over hundreds of years. And interestingly, right, the latest wave is not an Irish wave, but of course it is a Syrian wave that we have seen over the course of this last decade, where we have had to expand and understand differently what it means to actually heal the refugee, to heal the person without a home, to heal the person who needs it most. And whether that is a person who has no home, is a refugee. And Syria as well, interestingly, I know that they have a very interesting history here in the Latin world as well, where it is well known that waves of refugees from that general part of the world, including Syria, have had to come to the Latin world at various points as part of having to find a new home, right? And I think of the sign as Pisces as, very much in a sense communal, but also very much a sense of needing to go out, whether or not you want to, needing to join the collective, and needing to be a little bit of a nomad, if you will, as part of allowing other people to actually exercise and know themselves as more empathetic and to know themselves as more compassionate. And we have seen this, even with all the rhetoric and things that we hear sometimes. I found actually, as I traveled, that there were actually very welcoming communities all over Europe to this most recent wave of refugees, which at this point in history happened to be Syrian refugees. But as I said, we've had these different waves take place. Different parts of the world will sometimes have these waves, and the Irish know this well, and currently it is the Syrian people. And even with all the stuff that we hear, there was actually a lot of welcoming and a lot of loving presence for these people coming in and relocating out of necessity because they needed to. And I think a part of this, of course, is the fact that Neptune is moving through the sign of Pisces, which is going to continue. But I think a big part of this also has been the fact that Chiron has been moving through Pisces, and we have had to learn how it is that by showing compassion to others, we are healed in the process. Now, Chiron is understood as the wounded healer. And what we understand mythologically speaking of Chiron is that he was a centaur, so at least part of him was instinctual, as we know animals to be. And another part of him was, at least our understanding of being a human being is we like to think of ourselves as more elevated, more intellectual. So he had those two parts of him. He was a teacher. And when I say he was a healer, I mean physically he was a healer to the gods, like he administered medicine to the gods. Also philosophically and spiritually, he was part of bringing wisdom to the gods as well, tutoring them at a young age so that they could become the best versions of themselves. And what often isn't attributed to him is that he also was an astrologer and he was an oracle. And what's really interesting about Chiron is that even though he healed others, he healed the divine, the divinities around him. Even though he was a healer, he couldn't heal himself. And it was only by accepting that he wasn't able to heal himself that he became immortal. He became a constellation in the sky. He was granted that relief by being elevated to the point of the stars. So someone who actually interpreted the stars became the stars. And I find this very interesting symbolism because wherever Chiron is for you, it represents, at least on a personal level, but also for us as a collective as well, it represents where it is that we are asked to acknowledge the healers, and where it is that we are being asked to be more compassionate and more healing as well. It says something to how we go about healing, what we understand as the best way to heal as a collective. And it also speaks profoundly to the power of forgiveness, actually, and acceptance. And when we come to that point of acceptance, when we come to that point of forgiveness, there is something that happens that allows us to become immortal. There's something that happens that allows us to touch the immortality within us in the process. So before I dive in more to Chiron moving forward, let's look at what's happening in Aries and what has been happening in Aries. For much of this decade, we have had Uranus moving through the sign of Aries. Now, the sign of Aries has to do with a few different things, right? It has to do with the self. It has to do with our will. It has to do with, if I feel it, it's true, it's right. What I feel is the most immediate thing, and it is the most important thing. And so there's a great sense of instinctiveness to the sign of Aries and immediateness. This is also a sign that represents entrepreneurship. It also represents the military and law enforcement. There are a few important things to remember with this energy. I want to just explain some of the larger Chiron cycles, okay? Chiron takes 50 years to go all the way around the zodiac, and it doesn't travel just in a perfect circle, okay? It travels more like an oval, which means it'll spend more time in certain signs than others. And the sign of Aries is actually one of those signs where Chiron will spend the most amount of time, which means that more people are born with Chiron in Aries than any of the other signs. But regardless, the big thing to remember here is that the Chiron return happens right around 50 years old. So if you think about it, whether it's you that went through that time of turning 50, you're in your 50s or older now, or perhaps it is that you've seen other people turn 50 or they're older now and you observe their process. It tends to be an important time of transition. So if between now and 2027, you know that you will be turning 50, keep in mind that this is going to be that much more an important transit for you. This move of Chiron moving through the sign of Aries is going to make you that much more aware, on the one hand, where it is that there may be some deeper work to do. But on the other hand, what I really find happens here is that there's an invitation from the universe. And the invitation is to awaken the healer within you, to be a healing presence for yourself and in the world as well. And it tends to be an important transition time. We realize what it is that we've done and where it is that we have done some inner work to heal, but also now where some deeper layer of healing needs to happen. Now, keep in mind, as I look at the bigger sort of cosmic picture, this is one of the main transits that happens before we reach the Saturn return, which happens right around 56 and 57 years old. And it is ultimately the second Saturn return that people go through that ultimately transitions us into a new phase of life. But this is an important step towards that. This is where, on some level, deep within us, whether you want to call it our spirit or our psyche, this is where we start to sense that the second Saturn return is coming. This is where we start to sense, okay, retirement is close. I'm on the verge of entering a different phase of my life. What is it that I need to wrap up now? What is it that I need to wrap up in adulthood? If you are going to be turning 50 over the course of this transit of Chiron moving through Aries, then this is going to be that much more an important time for you, where you start to realize where it is that the final burst of work, if you will, needs to happen, where it is that you want to give your life or give yourself or give your dreams or your ambitions or your hopes and your wishes. Where is it that you want to give it another push forward? Years ago, a friend of mine gave me some amazing advice that I've actually found to be quite brilliant, if I do say so myself, and I've reflected on different periods. But I remember he said to me, 30 is the new 20 and 60 is the new 40. So what did he mean by that? Well, what he meant was that the things that we used to expect of people when they turn 20, we now don't really expect that of people until they turn 30, right? There was a time, like way back in the last century, right? Way back then. There was a time when by the time you were 20, you knew who you were going to marry, you had your job, you had your sense of security right about there, and you sort of knew your place in the world. Well, now our world is different, and we don't expect people to have those answers at 20. In fact, we sort of, at least collectively for much of the world, we expect people to be in a period of self-discovery, especially in your 20s. And it is at 30 that you feel like, okay, I kind of know my place in the world. I know what it is that I'm good at. I know what it is that I'm not as good at, so I can let other people do, and I'm going to accept myself more deeply. And it tends to be in the 30s that now what we used to do in the 20s, we do it now in our 30s, things like buying our house and having kids and stuff like that. Now, when he said that 60 is the new 40, well, what he was saying is that really we understand age differently, we understand living differently, and more people have a desire to experience life fully and to live fully. We are healthier than ever, we look better than ever, right? As a collective, certainly. And this is part of this change in our understanding of what it means to be human, and what it means to be in the world, what it means to be a part of our modern culture and our modern society. And so this to me is incredibly intriguing. This new understanding, really this shift started to happen with the discovery of Chiron. Chiron was discovered in the 70s, and it really was in the 70s that this shift began most profoundly, where the expectations of different age groups began to change. And we allowed ourselves more permission to discover ourselves and to discover who we are more deeply. So now, as we go forward, it is the Chiron return ultimately that is part of helping us to realize exactly this, that we may not be as old as we think we are. We feel, or something within us in our spirit sometimes in our body, sometimes in our spirit, but something within us feels youthful, feels eternal. But at the same time, we know that a transition is just down the road, that we are going to be entering this whole other phase of life where different expectations are going to start for us and different priorities are going to start to take over as well. So where is it that we can use this time well? Where is it that we can really capitalize on all that we have learned, and also take greater ownership for any work that still needs to be done, whether it's in our lives or within ourselves, as part of the great preparation for the greater transition that is coming up with our Saturn return a little bit further down the road. And the Saturn return, again, happens in our later 50s, and we really know it's over once we turn 60. So this is part of that last push, but it can also be very enriching as well and very enlivening as well. I know that Chiron can sound like serious business. It can sound very serious, right? It's the healer, the wounded healer. But look, Chiron's got a beautiful side as well. It's got a lighter side as well. Chiron was an astrologer after all, right? And Chiron was someone very connected to wisdom. And Chiron was one with a lot to share and a lot to give. And when we have our Chiron return, or when we have an important Chiron transit, like when Chiron starts doing something important in your chart or starts speaking to your sign in a particular way, well, that is when we start to realize how it is that we can feel better about ourselves by sharing, by giving, and by teaching in our own unique way. So when a planet or asteroid, in the case of Chiron, but when we have a new celestial body moving into a sign, what it does is it brings that energy to the different areas of life that that sign represents. And so Uranus is very much about independence. It's very much about truth, and it's also about equality, and it also has to do with things like mass media, the internet as well. And things going viral, like in terms of becoming aware to a whole lot of people very quickly. And in a sense, it has to do with awareness. It has to do with higher technologies as well. But it's not a very personal energy, right? It isn't very much about acknowledging the subtleties that may be there. And so some things that we've seen, of course, with Uranus moving into the sign of Aries has been this rise of an awareness of our personal power and our personal feelings. And on the one hand, there have been people who have said, okay, I feel it, so it's true, and really have voiced opinions that are very much on the fringes, but because they feel it, it is true and it is valid. That is part of what this transit can represent of Uranus moving through the sign of Aries. But the other part of this is the independence as well. And I remember way back when this cycle began, when this transit began, I said, this is going to bring the rise of the mini empires. Now, I didn't know how that was going to happen, of course, but I remember saying mini empires, no more gatekeepers, new technologies are going to be used so that people actually become more independent. And I remember reading a book at the time called Free Agent Nation by Daniel Pink, and I just really felt like, you know, that book represented what Uranus moving through Aries was going to be about. So we've actually seen this on all kinds of levels. People using new technologies like the internet and social media in particular to actually voice their truth, whatever they think their truth is, and however they want to express that, whether it's in writing or in video or otherwise, and actually to create, using an entrepreneurial spirit, to create these little mini companies, really, in just about every niche you can imagine. All over the world. And I remember predicting this, and you can read that as an article on my website now at nadiyashah.com. And so this is part of what we've seen. But we've also seen, because of the removal element of Uranus, and especially coming to things like the military and law enforcement, we've seen these particular types of work, these particular areas, become more computerized and become more detached as well, and to really experience a change in their technologies that actually are part of creating distance from whether you want to call it the actor and the subject, right? So the person actually in the military gear and the other side, there isn't that level of personalness as we had before. There's a lot more detachment. And we also see this as well in terms of law enforcement. And so now here we are, right? We've seen what it is to actually take things from a removal perspective, okay? And here comes Chiron, kind of, you know, following behind Uranus. Within weeks of Chiron moving into this new part of the sky, Uranus will leave. Within weeks of Chiron leaving later on in 2018, Uranus will retrograde back into the sign of Aries. And then again, as we enter into the new year in 2019, we will have Chiron first moving into Aries and then Uranus leaving the sign of Aries for a very long time to come. And I think that this is incredibly powerful and incredibly profound, and it's important to understand how the Aries, or rather Uranus, created a certain situation that was actually about detachment and really hyper intellectualism. And it was very much focused on this sense of using, whether you want to call it mass media or internet technologies or new media technologies, to actually express, right? If I express it, it is me, and I can be unique, and I can be whatever that is, and it's fine. But at what cost has all this led to us, right? Where are we now? And where is it now that we need to bring a spirit of healing? And on the one hand, yes, as a collective, but also in our individual journeys as well. And I think one of the areas where I'm already, like I said, like it's just been a couple of days since Chiron moved into the sign of Aries, and from the time that I'm recording this, and I'm already seeing some really profound examples of this in my own experience and perspective, but also in a larger perspective as well as part of the collective. And so I want to give you a couple of examples. You know, I very recently, just a couple of days ago, again, very newly with Chiron in the sign of Aries, I was kind of like walking down a street with somebody, and I heard people kind of saying like, hey, stop. And I turned to look at what was happening, and I hadn't realized, but there were like all these police officers there. There were like tons of police officers. Must have been at least 100, right? And there was a young lady sort of off on the other side, and it was just all police officers there in the middle. And they were surrounding this young lady, and she was saying like, why? And there were about 15 officers kind of surrounding, 12 or 15 officers, mostly female officers surrounding this young lady. And she was just, kind of saying, why? And what was really striking to me is that there was this smaller police officer. I get a little emotional when I think about it, because it was like kind of traumatic to actually see it. I can only imagine what it was like for the people involved. But there was this young, and she was a very small woman. She was a small female officer, and she was being particularly aggressive with this young lady. And she was like pulling her hair and grabbing her throat, and she literally just grabbed her and pulled her towards one of the cars to kind of put her in the back seat, and really like sort of doing it on her own. And all her fellow officers are just kind of watching like, okay, there she goes, there she does that. And as I was standing there and just kind of observing this, kind of in shock, right, because this happened very quickly in a matter of seconds, I, felt very strongly, I felt like this small woman who is behaving this way, this police officer, I thought, when was it that happened to you? Like, who did that to you? And now you feel that you can do that to others. Like, what are you replaying here? What is it that you think by having this illusion of a uniform, of the mask, right, of this position? How is it that this allows you to actually repeat something that you don't want to look at? So you'd rather just repeat it and play it out with this random young lady. That's how it very much felt. It felt like, yes, there was wounding taking place here. This young lady, I don't know what she did. Somebody said she was filming. I don't know, because it just happened in seconds, very quickly. Whatever it was, it granted this moment where, yes, there was a wounding taking place for the person being thrown into the back of the car, but this police officer was also acting from her wounds, and it became very obvious to me that she was behaving from her own wounds. And I suspected that this wasn't the first time she'd done it, based on the ways in which the officers around her were kind of looking at her and shaking their heads and things. It just kind of felt like this wasn't the first time. Now, this also reminded me very much of, years ago we had the Occupy movement, right? And the Occupy movement also in some ways spoke to Uranus moving into the sign of Aries, and people kind of demanding change and just using new technologies to want equality, right? That was one way. Now, depending on whatever your views are, right, this isn't about that. But what was interesting to me was that it was during that time as well that we saw a lot of police behavior, law enforcement behavior captured. That was kind of the same thing, and we saw it really all over the world. And in particular, I remember seeing it in terms of footage that was coming out of the United States, where we saw police officers more removed than ever, but also it was that Pluto squaring Uranus. So even though the people were saying that they wanted equality or whatever, the power and the really like squashing of that square from Pluto was happening at the same time. And so we did see police officers behave in ways that were particularly removed, right? Particularly distanced and possibly recreating patterns, but certainly there were people there who were victims who were in pain as a result of the way in which law enforcement was being carried out. Now, I share this because I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, after I witnessed this and I was reflecting on what we have seen with Uranus and Aries, And I was thinking about how, you know, what these environments need, right? What this particular industry or type of work job needs is more healers, right? Because absolutely, I please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying all of any profession are one way. All astrologers are not one way. You bring yourself to astrology, and whoever you are will determine how it is that you interpret the sky. And it's the same thing, I think, with anything that you do. If you are a loving person, if you are a sensitive person, you will bring that to the role that you have, whatever that role is. And we find loving people and sensitive people in every single role, including in law enforcement as well. I thought to myself that, you know, what we need to see more of and more examples of is people actually consciously bringing the spirit of the healer into this role of law enforcement. But the problem is that the spirit of the healer, the person who's going to be the healer, tends to be a sensitive type of person. And it's very hard to do a particular type of job and be a sensitive person as well. It's very hard to be a conscious person and do a particular type of job. I remember years ago, many years ago, I was speaking to somebody, and he was a detective, a police detective. And I remember him saying to me, like, the one thing that stood out to me in my very brief conversation with him, and the reason I'll always remember him, is because he said that, you know, to be a detective means that day in and day out, you are dealing with the worst of society. You are dealing with the worst of human beings and what it means to be a human being, like the lowest of what it means to be a human being. It is a part of your life every day, 8 to 12 hours every single day. You are breathing this world that actually involves the lowest expressions and the most removed from what we think of love and kindness that you can get. These are the types of people that you're dealing with on a constant basis. And I thought to myself, you know, there is a certain pain that comes with that. There's a certain need to be healed that occurs, but is there space for that? Where is it that we are allowing people to acknowledge that what they are doing is hard, or what they are doing is challenging for them if they are going to be people connected to their humanity and connected to the humanity of other people? How do we do that? Well, I think that Chiron moving into the sign of Aries is going to be very helpful in terms of that. I think this is going to allow us to see the healers within law enforcement and within the military. But I think it may also help us to expand our understanding of how these particular industries need more healers and how to bring healing to these particular types of work. For example, PTSD, right? PTSD, we see it so much in people who are on the front lines in terms of being in the military all over the world, right? No matter what the belief or the ethos or the philosophical affirmations of a culture, every single culture around the world has people in its military, and as a result of that role, have some level of post-traumatic stress disorder. It is part and parcel for the role, and the people who don't, or the people who don't acknowledge it, that this is work that can take a toll on a person's soul, a toll on a person's psyche, well, that's not the easiest person to be around, right? And we see that as well. There are lots of examples out there as well. I'm reminded of Iyanla Vanzant, right? Iyanla Vanzant once said, she worked as a lawyer and she worked in prisons, and she said that she just couldn't do it anymore. And her quote was, "There's no love there. There's just no love there." Well, I wouldn't say that there's no love. Of course there's love, but it is so deeply buried. It is so deeply masked in that particular environment of, for example, prisons, and of, for example, people who are engaged in criminal behavior. And what I think we're now going to start to see more and more is that the people who actually have to deal with those people who are so afraid of their own love and wisdom that they hide it behind different types of behavior, that the people who have to engage these people also need healing as well. There's healing that needs to take place. Now, again, I don't want to be misunderstood here, right? So I'm a little bit reluctant to even share this. I might edit this part out. It is possible also. Because I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not saying that injustices are okay, and I'm not saying that what I saw the female officer do to this young lady was in any way justifiable or in any way okay. And I'm not saying that, you know, at the same time that I'm taking sides or something, or I don't support people who actually are doing the things to keep us safe, right? At least in Toronto, we say to serve and protect. Those people who are doing that, I don't want to in any way be disrespectful. Now, I'll give you an example of how this plays out. Like I said, it is days right now that Chiron is in the sign of Aries. And just really today, from the time that I'm recording this, in Toronto, we had a tragedy take place, right? You might have seen the hashtag Toronto Strong, my hometown of Toronto. We had a tragedy take place. And there was a person, not very mentally stable person, who killed people and injured people. And there was a police officer who came. And to me, this was just the example of Chiron in Aries. This was the example of how it is that Chiron in Aries is going to operate, where you saw this police officer actually look at this person and not react, right? But actually think about what healing needs to come in this space. Now, it might have been instinctual. It might be that this person, this police officer, isn't even thinking about things like healing or using that type of language or that type of understanding, right? But there was this police officer, and there was a person who just killed a whole bunch of people, telling him that he had a gun and he was going to kill him. And the police officer didn't take the bait and actually engage this person and was able to apprehend this person in a way that was humane. Now, where is it that we can see more of that, right? Where is it that more people, more demographics, more communities can feel more of that, more of, regardless of whatever they've done, to still have their humanity acknowledged, to be approached with sensitivity. And think about the police officer in that, like how differently they might have felt if they had been reactionary, and how it is that that person, that police officer, feels about themselves having done their work the way that they did it. He's being very widely commended in Canada right now at this moment, but also being held up around the world as an example. And I think this is an example of Chiron in Aries. And so I share this with you because this is part of what I think we're going to be experiencing as a collective, greater conversations around this. And my hope is with this that we see more people feeling healed as a result, feeling healed for just knowing that they can be in their truth, that they can embody their truth, they can speak their truth and be okay. They can live their truth and be safe. And to know that the people that they're encountering in terms of these people who hold these very difficult roles are also in some way engaged in a process of healing. So I hope my intention there was understood, and my hope for all of us as a collective, really at all times, my prayer is, and my mom was telling me that this is her prayer, and I think I got it from her, this is also my prayer as well. My prayer for us is that, and my hope for us, my meditation for us, however you want to put it, is that more of us are willing to be open to our own healing right where we are and as we are in this moment. Now, other ways of understanding Chiron moving into the sign of Aries beyond these specific examples I gave, well, Aries is a sign that very much is about your willpower. And so I think we are going to see a collective emphasis on harnessing your own will as part of your healing. So whether that is, if you think it, it will be, right? If you're not well, focusing more on the power of your energy and of your determination. I think we're going to see more examples of that as well, of people who were just determined to get better, determined to be healed, and as a result of their determination, they were. This is something we'll be talking about more in terms of the collective. Now, the sign of Aries also has to do with the athlete as well. I do think with Uranus moving through the sign of Aries, we saw like sort of an awareness of the elevated ways in which people can excel at sports in ways that aren't always ethical, right? And so I think now with Chiron coming into this part of the sky, it's going to bring a measure of healing as well to that understanding and to our understanding of why it is that athletes will actually, not really care about things like long-term health in order to win right now. Well, we're going to at least have the exploration of that and understand the psyche and the psychology of the athlete more deeply as well. And as part of this, I also think that we'll see new and alternative ways of, like the old is new again, right? So Chiron, it has to do with like new therapies, but actually it's more like alternative therapies, not so much like cutting edge and, like that's more the Uranus thing of using the really cutting edge technologies, especially to excel at sports as Uranus and Aries. This is going to be a lot more about how is it that the athlete can be the best that they can be on a more holistic level. And we'll be looking at ways in which athletes actually heal so that they can get back into sport that much more quicker. And there will be like sort of alternative therapies, so like the old therapies coming back into style or coming back into vogue as part of what athletes will do in order to be ready for their next game, in order to heal more quickly and be ready for their next game. So that's also something that we'll be seeing over the course of the coming years. Now, I mentioned entrepreneurship as part of Chiron moving into Aries, and I think you'll find a lot of people out there pursuing entrepreneurship for its own sake, for their own healing. And again, we come to this place of truth. If you feel it and you share it, that is very much of what the sign of Aries is about. Like, you feeling it is enough. Well, how is it that the act of actually being you actually is a healing thing? For you to actually be in your truth and be in yourself and maybe turn that into a business, right? Following that niche idea. How is it that that actually can bring healing to others? So whether it is more healing businesses showing up, which is possible, or people feeling healed in the process of going their own way or having side businesses or pursuing independent entrepreneurship, we should see more people pursuing that and finding not only that they're doing work that is like holistically oriented, but the holistic benefits will be something that more of us are talking about as well. And interestingly, this should be very good for entrepreneurs who find it challenging to get healthcare because they are entrepreneurs. Now, again, regardless of where you are in the world, of course, your starting point matters, but for a lot of people, what happens is when you work, you get like sort of extended benefits when you work within a company that you may not always get when you are an entrepreneur. Well, with Chiron moving into the sign of the entrepreneur, hopefully we'll see more ways in order to have entrepreneurs take the best care of themselves, their health, and their healing as well. What I love about this transit, look, among all the things that I talked about, and I know it got a little intense there for a moment. I appreciate you staying with me to this point. But look, what I love about this is that it is, to me, always a gift. Healing is a gift, and it's not always easy, right? It's not easy to have certain conversations. It hasn't been easy over the course, really for most of this decade so far, for us to look at prisons and how people are treated in prisons. I remember going to a talk at in Astrology Toronto, and this was right around the time it was a talk on Chiron, and I don't remember who the speaker was, what her name was, but she really made an impression on me. And that was because she was talking about Chiron in a chart, and she was talking about Chiron moving into Pisces and what it means for prisons. And, you know, she said something to me. She said, well, not to me, but she said something in front of the class, in front of the talk. She said that, you know, one day we will look at how it is that we talk about men being raped in prison with the same sense of disbelief and disdain and really sadness that we do when we look at the ways in which we have joked about women being drugged and raped. And interestingly, we've had some, you know, examples of this as of recently, where we can look back at comedians, you know, in the 50s joking, in the 60s joking, and making jokes about women actually being drugged and then being sexually violated. And that was considered funny at that time. And I remember her saying this to me, or saying this in the talk, and the thought of it had just never occurred to me. The thought had just never occurred to me that this is something not to be joked about, that this is something that should not be, that this is something that is not fair, regardless of what a person has done. What level of compassion are we going to show to that person, regardless of what they have done? And how is it that we are going to bring that spirit of compassion? Well, I think for some of us, and as a collective, we've had to really look at ourselves more deeply, to look at our compassionate spirit. And sometimes that happens with the contrast. Sometimes that happens by looking at examples where it seems like there's no compassion, where it seems like the compassion is lacking, and whether these are celebrated figures, whether they're disdained figures. We've had examples of that as a way to connect to our own compassionate spirit. With Chiron moving into the sign of Aries, it is going to be about the healing power of owning your power, acknowledging where it is that you do have power, and simply by exercising your own agency to improve your life, to have your life go in the direction you desire, well, the act itself can be profoundly healing in your own life and in the lives of the people around you. Well, thank you so much. We are going to go into the individual horoscopes now for what Chiron moving into the sign of Aries means for you in your sign. I did these whole expansive, expanded horoscopes for each and every sign. And again, if you are a superstar, if you're one of my superstars, you get unlimited access to any special horoscope video I put up. And for superstars, those videos are already there in the superstar space, or you can download them individually as well by going on to my website at nadiyashah.com. You can sign up to be a superstar or just get the individual download. But here come previews. The first minute of each and every horoscope that's already up online on my website is following, to look at how it is and where it is that you will be summoned to be a healer right where you are, where you will be asked to bring an energy of healing, but more importantly, you will heal in the process. You will allow yourself to be healed that much more deeply as well. And ultimately, healing is good. It's not always easy, but it is good. It's good for the spirit and it's good for the soul. And it is the soul and the spirit in particular that Chiron is interested in. Well, thank you for watching. It'll be a great transit. Enjoy. And here come the horoscopes for each and every sign. Hello, fabulous superstar Aries. Welcome to your Chiron special horoscope, looking at Chiron moving into your sign, really right to 2027. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. It is an incredible time, and it is an important time for you. So let's take it a step back. What has been happening in your sign since the start of the decade is that Uranus has been in your sign. And this has been part of freeing you, really liberating you to help you to be truly who it was that you were created to be and not who you've been conditioned to be, to borrow the words of Jeff Green. And ultimately what this decade so far has been for you has been about being honest with yourself about who you are and really being yourself with no apologies. That's really what it comes down to. Well, now what's going to start? Hello, fabulous superstar Taurus. Welcome to your Chiron Special horoscope with Chiron moving into the sign of Aries, really for the better part of the next 9 years, right? 10 years almost. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you so much for being here. So Chiron is on the move, but before we jump into where Chiron is going, let's talk about where Chiron has been. Since the beginning of the decade, you have experienced Chiron moving through a part of the sky for you that has to do with friendships. It has to do with your alliances with other people. And this has led to a connection with others. Now, for some, it might have been like a very obvious support groups, emotional support, health support, healing support groups that allowed you to feel like you were with other people as part of your shared healing journey. But for others, it might not. Fabulous superstar Gemini, welcome to this special horoscope video looking at Chiron moving into the sign of Aries starting in 2018 and really for the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. What an amazing time it is. What an amazing transit it is. We are in changing signs and changing times. Big moves are happening in the sky now. Uranus is leaving a part of the sky where Chiron is now entering. And before I jump into where it is that Chiron is going, let's reflect a little bit on where Chiron has been, where Uranus has been. So Chiron has been moving through a part of the sky for you since the beginning of the decade that has to do with understanding ultimately what it is that you believe your life purpose is. And for a lot of Geminis out there, there might have been an understanding that came about that had to do with helping people. Fabulous superstar Cancer, welcome to your special horoscope looking at Chiron moving into a brand new area of your sky, moving into the very top of your sky for the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. Well, in April of 2018, Chiron is going to move into a brand new area of life. We'll just get a little bit of a taste of it before Chiron retrogrades back in September to where it's been since the beginning of the decade. And then in February of 2019, we'll move in for a nice long stay right to 2027, right into 2027. And this is going to be that much more an important time for you. With Chiron moving into the very top of your sky, this is considered one of the hot spots of the chart. It is considered a particularly sensitive area of the sky. And it is ultimately a part of the sky where you start to... Hello, fabulous superstar Leo. Welcome to your special horoscope looking at Chiron moving into the sign of Aries for the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. Well, what an amazing transit it is. We are now, and you are now preparing to have Chiron move into a part of the sky for you that has to do with opening up the world to you and helping you to understand your place in the world very differently than you have before. This is also going to help you that much more clarify your own values, your own beliefs, whether they are your spiritual values, your political values as well. And this will also help you to awaken a sense of philosophical curiosity and even intellectual as well. I think you're going to enjoy it very much. In fact, you know, sometimes Chiron moving in the sky isn't always the easiest. Hello, fabulous superstar Virgo. Welcome to your special horoscope looking at Chiron moving into the sign of Aries, really for the better part of the next 9 years, right to 2027. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. What an amazing transit it is. What an amazing time it is that we are now living through. There's a sense now of our collective understanding of where it is our most important healing is going to take place. Well, there's a shift taking place. There's a change happening. And for you, you're about to go a whole lot deeper. Deeper to levels of psyche, to levels of soul, to levels of worthiness on the one hand, and to levels of wealth and appreciating the wealth that is in your life in a whole different and much deeper level than you ever have before. These are part of the rewards that these coming Hello, fabulous superstar Libra. Welcome to your special horoscope, looking at Chiron moving into the sign of Aries for the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. What an incredible transit it is, really redefining, if you will. And this is going to speak very profoundly for you where it comes to matters of love, where it comes to matters of partnership, where it comes to matters of knowing who is on your side that much more clearly. Who is with you and who is not with you? Well, if this transit is anything, it is honest, and it brings a change to relationships and a change to relationship status, often for the better and often for that much more healing as well. So let's take it one at a time, and let's actually look at what has been happening in this part of the sky for you. Well, Uranus has been moving through this. Hello, fabulous superstar Scorpio. Welcome to your Chiron Special Horoscope, looking at the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. What an amazing time it is. What an amazing transit it is. This is a time of shifting energies, big energies making a change. And for you in particular, you will start focusing more on your day-to-day life, recognizing the sacred in your daily life and looking at the people that you interact with as healers and as people that you can bring a healing spirit to. At the same time, you will start to take better care of yourself and start to heal very deeply, body, mind, and soul. It truly is an exciting time. So let's take it one step at a time. Well, Chiron, since the beginning of the decade, has been moving through a part of the sky for you that has allowed you to get in touch with superstar Sagittarius. Welcome to your Chiron Special Horoscope, looking at Chiron moving into a brand new part of the sky for the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. What an amazing time it is. What an amazing transit it is. I feel as I look at this that there is something within you that is going to heal your heart deeply, that is going to understand the value of trusting your heart and experiencing love on levels that you just have not known before. Whatever barriers are there for you to actually experience the type of joy and love and fun that you know you desire and you can have, well, that is exactly where your most profound healing is going to be, and also where some of the most profound opportunities are going to be for you as well. So let's consider what has been happening in this part of the sky since the beginning of... Hello, fabulous superstar Capricorn. Welcome to your Chiron Special Horoscope, looking at Chiron moving into a brand new part of your sky for the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. What an amazing time it is. What an amazing transit it is. It is this symbol. Chiron is this symbol of profound healing. And that healing is now going to move forward into a new area of your life. So where has Chiron been? Well, it's been in a part of the sky for you since the start of the decade that has helped you to find your voice, to heal any barriers to actually expressing yourself spontaneously and fully in a given moment, and to find some authenticity that you uniquely have to share. It's helped you heal your relationships with your siblings and cousins and neighbors, even though at times if those relationships felt a little bit like they were... Hello, fabulous superstar Aquarius. Welcome to your Chiron Special Horoscope, looking at Chiron moving into a new part of your sky for the better part of the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. Well, what an amazing time it is. What an amazing transit it is. It really is a time of shifting energies. And Chiron, changing signs, is going to represent an area that is new to you. An area where you start to feel more motivated and feel a sense of great reward and great healing by focusing in. Now, this is a part of the sky for you that has to do with a few different things. Where Chiron is going is where Uranus has been. So this is a part of the sky that has to do with your siblings, your cousins, and your neighbors. Healing those relationships is going to be an important part of the next 9 years. But the other part of this has to do with communication. It has to do with expression. Hello, fabulous superstar Pisces. Welcome to your Chiron special horoscope. Really, Chiron moving into a new part of the sky for the better part of the next 9 years. It's a horoscope for the next 9 years. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. Well, this is really big news. Let me just say that right out of the gate. Chiron is leaving your sign. First, briefly, there's a little brief moment there between April and September of 2018, and then in 2019 in February for a nice long stay right to 2027. So this is a big deal. When Chiron leaves your sign, you will feel a change. You will feel a shift. And it just will feel like you're less vulnerable. Like there's a little bit less sensitivity and it feels like it's good, right? It feels like you can sort of have a healthy sense of detachment between you and the rest of the world. Not